what is now way past 6 months straight of meeting every Wednesday morning for inspiration, connection, and exercise of the Telstra Connected Cycling on Video series. We wouldn't be here without our ongoing drive and determination of the Telstra Connected Cycling Pro Team, Sandy Woolley, Diane Hannon, Kurt Houston, Anna Mallon, Cam Thomas, John Pitchinen, and Darren Mills. So thank you very much again, Pro Team. We've been so blessed with the calibre of our special guests who are continuing to accept our invitation to make an impact on the Telstra Connected Cycling community. Our special guests have included Olympic champions, Tour de France winners, the big names in men's and women's pro cycling, filmmakers and endurance riders, war heroes and soccer stars, as well as cancer survivors and cancer curers. All have arrived ready to give their story and provide insight, and we are so grateful for that. This morning will be no different with our special guest phoning in from London, the voice of cycling, the one and only Phil Liggett, MBE. Now, the man from the pro team who is responsible for landing such a wonderful guest as Phil is none other than our ride director, Sandy Woolley. Sandy's passion for Telstra and Telstra Connected Cycling is in the Category 1 zone easily. And everyone who works alongside him or rides with him comes away drenched in goodness, the goodness of the bike and connecting with people, whether they like it or not. So to roll us out and sink in the ride on the Zwift ride this morning, here is our ride director, Sandy Woolley, for an update and the state of play. So Sandy, over to you.
Good morning, Duncan. Thank you very much for that kind intro. We are rolling out. For those of you who are in the ride, I encourage you to stick with the beacon. We're going to try and form a bunch and stick it together a bit better than past weeks. So 2 watts per kilo as we roll out. For those of you who are new, welcome to our weekly series, all about connecting people through these tough times. And already I'm huffing and puffing. So it's just fantastic to have Phil Liggett here, a legend of the sport, the voice that so many of us actually know, and including, even if you're not a cyclist, people would know Phil's voice from watching Tour de France broadcasts over the years. So fantastic to have Phil on this morning. Big call out too to all our people around the world who are joining us. So thank you very much for joining us. And our walkers, Doona dwellers, it's great to have you here too. Big thank you to our previous guest, Dan Jones, Matthew Keenan, Scott McGrory, who gave us a big call out on the podcast, The Detour, 7:30 p.m, streamed live, easy to find, well worth a listen, and just fantastic for the support and that we get from those guys there. So with that, back to my huffing and puffing. Enjoy the ride and really enjoy the interview with Phil today. Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Now, our time with our special guest this morning could be completely taken up with me reading his many achievements that's listed on his CV. So the voice of cycling, Phil Liggett, MBE, joins us to speak about his incredible life and his passions all the way from London. So some of the top level stats from his commentary career include 48 Tour de France coverages since 73, 10 Summer Olympic Games since 1980 in Moscow. Tokyo next year will be his 11th. 5 Winter Games since 92 in Albertville. Phil has won Emmy Awards for his role in documentaries on cycling and other things. He's authored several books, including an award-winning Tour de France for Dummies. One of your best, Phil. Phil has founded races around the world, is patron of several races, several clubs, charities. He's a board member or an advisory board member of several peak sporting bodies in Britain and around the world, all the while spending 6 months every year in different hotel rooms across the globe while following the mad world of cycle racing. And on top of this, probably his greatest achievement, Phil has been married to Olympic speed skater Trish Tipper for almost 50 years. And Trish has had her own brilliant career alongside Phil's in what is probably the best team in cycling in history. So please welcome Phil Liggett to Telstra Connected Cycling. G'day, Phil. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for that, Duncan. And hello to everybody who's on the bike and listening in. And 2 watts per kilo, did Sandy say? That means I would have to pump out immediately 160 watts. I haven't done that for years.
Well, that's why, it's probably a good thing. You can build up to joining us on our Zwift ride because we're that good. Hey, I just want to bring to your attention as well that the position that you've got speaking to us in London, you've got a halo around your head.
It is true. Yeah, I'm trying to block it out. We'll get Trish to control the light switch.
No, leave it. No, it's very fitting. No, please leave it. It looks awesome. It looks awesome.
There
All
you are,
right,
it's
so
gone now.
there you go. Oh,
You've
that's a
blown my
shame.
halo. It's
We've
pitch
blown your
black here, of
halo.
course, because here it's 9:05 in the evening,
That's
and
pissing with rain.
we live in the country and really deep in the woods, and it is
Mm.
pitch black outside this room.
Oh, well, look, it looks fantastic from where you're standing, and thanks for joining us,
Thanks,
mate. Where do we start? Because you've come a long way from your working at the zoo days, riding back and forth, crashing into elephants and breaking your bike. Do you sometimes look at the journey that you've had to this point? And we're going to get on to COVID in a minute, but do you sometimes look back at your journey and just feel a little exhausted because you've packed so much into it?
No, I've just been so lucky. My life started out, I wanted to be something to do with animals, and you're right, I hit an elephant when I was working at Chester Zoo, and I took offence at him breaking my bike, and I realised I was literally going to shovel shit all my life and not do any work towards being a zoologist, which is what I wanted. So I left. I became a statistical accountant for a couple of years, and the boss told me that, and said to me, I wouldn't be happy if I didn't see if I could be a pro bike rider. So he held my job for a year and sent me off to Belgium. I didn't get the pro contract, but I got the next best thing. I became a journalist, and I became a TV commentator. So, and I've done the two things in my life which have always been my hobby: animals and cycling. And I converted them into the way of my life. And I've been extremely lucky and fortunate. Mum always used to say to me, "You're not like the other boys." I wasn't too sure what she meant, but I guess I do now.
Well, mate, there's a whole hour of therapy just with what your mum said about you. Hey, listen, hey,
You're right.
that statistical accountancy, it's been a cornerstone of a lot of the way you approach both your commentary work, your bird watching, even the COVID stats that you're collecting at the moment for some
Yes.
reason. We're not too sure why, but you'll go into that. But it's really been the cornerstone, that learning about that statistical. You've had such a talent at statistics, and cycling, of course, throws up, statistics forever.
Yeah, I do. I love reading facts and figures. And before I go on any television show, I've got a list of the last time each particular nation was either on a podium or finished second or third or never won, so that I could call immediately if, for example, Slovakia was to win a stage. I can say that's the first time a Slovakian rider's won a stage in the Tour de France for 45 years, because I will have put that fact down in front of me. In these modern days of TV commentating with NBC, I just can't get used to them having a whole research department sending me emails every 3 minutes with facts and figures. I even forget to look at the emails because I always like to think my facts are better. But they gave me some gems in the Tour de France this year. I will say that. I've always done it myself and enjoyed every, and do it to this day. An hour and a half when I get up, even now in COVID, the first thing I do is log all the results such as they are, all the news peaks up the day,
So 48 years, never being at home in July, always in Europe,
until this
always
year.
chasing. Yeah, till this year. So what was that like, Phil? Can you explain? Because the coverage rated off out of the highest ratings in 10 years. Strangest conditions for someone like you who's been following the tour for so long. Can you tell us what was like this year?
Well, I had no enthusiasm for the tour, and I was convinced it was never going to start. I really was. I was doing it like I was just working in a maze, because it was never going to happen. 2 weeks to go, we're all talking about getting the passes to get into Sky Television in West London with the COVID, etc., as a non-employee of the company. And I thought, well, it's all a waste of time. But in fact, of course, as you know, we got to Nice. And I remember my opening words on NBC television was, well, I never thought this would happen. And here we go. And from then on, I really got into the tour. And I was 5,000 kilometers away from Bob Roll, who was working in Stamford in Connecticut, just outside of New York. And we didn't miss a beat. We had 2 spy cameras, one on me, one on Bob, so I could see him. We signaled as when I was stopping talking so he could pick up. And it just worked. And the bosses, after 48 hours, called me on the car phone driving home and said, I wasn't driving, by the way. My taxi driver was, just in case, before the letters come in. And the boss just said, this is awesome, he said. you would not believe you two guys are not sat next to each other. And over the next 3 weeks, it developed. And two weeks after the tour came the cream on, which was the biggest viewing figures for 10 years. And I suspect that next year, because next year's Tour de France is only 8 months away, we'll be doing it off tube, as we call it, again, because there's no time to set up 80 odd people working in France in the 8 months, booking hotels, etc., arranging cars for us all, and then find 2 weeks to go. COVID is still with us, and we have to reorganise. So no chances being taken next year. I think we'll be off tube again.
Yeah, well, what we all feared from the Tour de France this year basically is unfolding at the Giro. When you look at
Yes.
Sunweb, Mitchelton's got Jumbo Visma, poor old Michael Matthews has got it. When you're looking at basically how the Giro is now affected and probably going to shut down the Vuelta if it even starts, it really threw up these amazing conditions this year, Phil, that probably in the 48 years that you've been covering it, you've never seen it before, because every single day you didn't know if it was going to be shut down. So as Scott McGrory and Matthew Keenan, who've come on our show and talked about it, and Dan Jones has talked about it, it almost became like a classic every day. Who's going to be in front today if it's shut down tomorrow? It was just such a crazy and wonderful tour to watch.
That's why it was such a good race, I'm sure, because the rider who was in the yellow jersey could well have been declared the winner of the tour at any moment. And if you ever interviewed riders, finally, before the race, I interviewed most of the teams in the 2 weeks before. It was if we go to the start. I'm saying, if we go to the start. Once if we get to Paris, and it continued till the day before, if we get to Paris. Because COVID was getting such a grip of Paris with the last 48 hours of the race, I was beginning to convince myself we were going to stop at the end of the time trial on Les Planches de Belleville, and that would be it. We wouldn't be going to Paris. But we got to Paris, we finished, there was a huge success, and it was a very different race. But I've never seen Britain in July since 1973, and I found it quite intriguing to find that the weather was quite nice, actually. I began to miss it then. Didn't realise what I lost in 1972.
What did how did Trish cope with having you around?
I'm not too sure about that, because she continued her life of dancing, but except she's dancing on Zoom to all the teachers and coaches, whereas she would normally be in the dance halls. I was coming home by cab at getting home around 6:30 to 7 o'clock every night, so it was quickly to dinner and to bed, because I was up at 5:30 for the taxi pickup at 6:30, back to the studios, and 3 hours prep with the NBC in the States. Because don't forget, those guys in the States were getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, because we're a 5-hour time difference backwards to the United States. So I had no complaint. Those poor good boys were driving to work at 2:30 a.m. every morning and staying long hours, but at least they were going home at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, where I was going home at 6:30. Yeah, but it was a great. Everybody pulled the weight like you wouldn't believe, and the tweets and the feedback on the social media, they said such nice things. I was very flattered.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. They were going home for their nana nap, and you couldn't afford one. Hey, listen.
No.
When you look back at your long career, because we're talking about this year and the crazy conditions, but the Tour de France seems to throw up crazy a lot, and that's the beauty of it. That's the majesty of it. All the villages, all the towns, all the stars, all the new technology, the weather, of course. So when I'm trying to break up your career and talk about your career, it's very, very difficult. So I'm talking about decades, and to be doing it off tube now, as you've just described, because of COVID, which part of your long career at the Tour de France do you romanticize about the most? Because in the early days, there would have been fax machines and doing copy over the phone to the Guardian and all the other papers, and then, trying to find a hotel, trying to find a phone, trying to do your post, then have a feed, then get to bed, then get to the start, then get to the finish, then get to the press room, be on top of all the stories as they break and all that kind of thing from the road. And then, you come into technology. Thank you, Telstra. Did I plug Telstra? Anyway, I just did. Anyway, and you come into this technology and all of a sudden, you're basically doing it on your phone in the moment. People are tweeting. People are, so everything has changed as the racing has changed. And, it's a very strong relationship between the press guys and the riders. But which era do you look at as the most fun? You're right. You're back.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
okay.
got you.
Yep, you're
And,
right. You're right.
sorry,
It's absolutely fine.
Oh, I'm
Yep.
with you now, Duncan.
Yep.
Yeah,
No.
what's it?
Yeah. Which year up?
That would be 73.
73.
Yeah, he's on a percentage.
Okay. Are you okay now?
Yep.
Right.
100%.
Okay, superb. My first tour was in 73. Everything was novel. I was so naive as to think that the sun never went in Europe in the month of July, because it never did. It was red hot. Lewis O'Connor became the champion of a great Tour de France as well. But we had to do everything ourselves, and I didn't speak any French at the time at all. So it was a question of beg, borrow, or steal what you could get. Now, when I wrote a story every day for Britain, for newspapers, and then I had to go up to the what do they call them? Telephone operators, yeah. They don't exist anymore, do they?
Telephone.
And I used to say to them, can I have a ligne vert, which was a reverse charge call to London? Yes, of course, Mr. Liggett. And they'd give them the number, and then they would call you an hour and a half later to dictate your copy on a terrible line that you would spell your words the Tour, capital Tour, de France, and then you'd spell it out. It would take you 45 minutes to dictate 400 words.
Oh my
So
God.
that took 3 hours from the minute the stage finished to getting your deadlines. And then when you got a dope scandal, as was the case in 1977 with Michel Polontier being found cheating the dope control after he'd taken a test and he was in yellow, we had to rewrite the story. That was a major problem, because now there's 800 journalists queuing up to see 6 telephonists to get them a transfer call to their newspapers somewhere in the world. And they were nightmares those days. And of course, the noise in the press room from the typewriters crashing out the words. Nowadays, you walk in, it's deathly silent. They're all on computers. They just sit there and dial the number into their own phone, plug it into the computer, zonk. The word's gone across to the paper, finished. My days were much more exciting. I used to remember the Colombian journalists who came big time into the 80s with the arrival of Lucho Herrera and Fabio Parra, the superstars from Colombia, finally penetrating the Tour de France and looking like a winner. Droves of Colombian journalists came over. They were crazy, Latinos. They would collect all the coins, because we didn't do the euro in those days. We had French francs in coins, because they had to pump these coins into a phone box somewhere along the route, like a machine gun, to keep the line open to Colombia, to Bogota. They used to play their program off a tape recorder to the handset of the phone, including the adverts, and then grab anybody walking past the phone box for a live insert. Didn't matter what language you spoke. I often finish up talking English about Lucho Herrera. Or they'd knock on some Frenchman's door, and some lady would come and they'd say, sorry, madame, we'll pay you for the call, but we must ring Bogota. Okay, what? Oh dear. They were fantastic. And those days have all gone, so with it has gone a lot of the romance of the Tour de France. Now it is a little bit too clinical for me, if I'm honest. It's not the same event as it was, of course, all those years ago, but I'm quite sure the people that saw the first visit to the Alps and the Pyrenees in 1910, 1911, they probably think it was pretty boring in 1975.
What about your own adventures? Because to find somewhere to eat, to get to your hotel, to get through the traffic, the fandom that follows the tour and always has followed the tour, the crazy Basque fans, the crazy Colombian fans, the crazy Australian fans, the whole Tour de France, for someone like yourself, must be such an adventure. And then to be able to find those little oases every Tour de France where you sit down and rip a Guinness, or a few of your journo mates all of a sudden find a little cafe and there's a bit of grappa there and away you go.
No, they were the good days.
And they're like these little pockets of memories in such a hurricane of activity.
In the early tours, we travelled the same day as the tour. We saw the rides at the start. We raced ahead and made 2.5 hours. I didn't do television, but I was with the guy who did, so I sat by him at the commentary position. And then once that was over, an hour and a half writing our story and phoning it to London, and then we would have a very nice meal by 8 o'clock in the evening. It never happened for the last 25 years because it changed. The tour got so popular and so busy, we work a day ahead. I never speak to a Tour de France rider from day one when we leave the start line 24 hours before they do to the finish in Paris. I remember bumping into Robbie McEwen at the time trial on the Saturday and before we went to Paris, and I was at the start because the start and finish was the same place. And I remember Robbie finishing and shouting across. He said, "Hey, have you been on all the tour?" And I said, "You cheeky sod, Robbie, I've been on every day of it, but I work a day ahead of you on television." And Robbie knows now because he does exactly the same thing, of course. Yeah. But no, that was a different tour in those days. That was more very enjoyable. We always ate with the journalists from other countries. We made good friends with them. And now we don't speak to anybody. We go and do the job and we drive. And so we lost a lot of the input because they tell you the stories about their riders and what they're like, as we would tell them about our riders. Although in those days we didn't have many good riders. But nowadays, of course, everybody wants to know the UK people because we do have good riders. But no, the tour has changed its total identity. It's a money-making machine and has to be because it causes an awful lot of inconvenience to France, closing all those roads every day and closing down companies for the day. Mind you, COVID has proved far more successful at that than the Tour de France ever did. But even so, it's been very difficult in those early days. And the Tour had to justify it. And so they sold France. And they sold France very, very well. So the tourism hit record numbers when the Tour really got to sell it as a shop window event.
Hey, listen, Bill, you talked about riders before and you mentioned that pest, Robbie McEwen. Who did you fall in love with? Well, we're just about to get a grape check. What are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking. That's a very good point. I just got it quickly. Cheers. It is an Australian Chardonnay. I have to admit. I thought that would be fitting.
Back on the Shardies. Nice.
It was bought here in Britain.
I'll find the bottle.
Bought here in Britain.
Very good. Like all skip wine should be bought in Britain.
To find the bottle to prove me wrong. But anyway.
Very good.
Carry on,
so while you're enjoying that and your palate is getting a wash, who's been your favourite riders? Because you did fall in love with the Irish riders in the early days, and you did many articles on the two Irish riders that you fell in love with, Roche and Kelly, and stuff like that. So every era you seem to have fallen in love with riders, and as you were just saying before, and we'll get to basically how you do it today because you don't see them anymore. But during those times, it must have been very, very exciting to head into a race and be able to mingle with the riders before the start, after the start, at restaurants and stuff like that. Do you do it so much anymore?
We certainly have seen eras. You can place all of my 48 tours in eras, and I was very lucky when Greg LeMond became the first American to win, and history says he's the only American to win.
We'll get to that in a minute.
In 86. But then in 87, when Stephen Roche won, it was coinciding with the Kelly, who was not, well, we say he wasn't a Grand Tour winner, but of course he was. He won the Tour of Spain. And it was a year when the sprinters were suited to the course. Kelly could climb mountains as well, pretty well. And he was hard. But at that time, Ireland had a population of 3 million people. And you had the two best bike riders in the world running in parallel. And between the two of them, they won every major bike race on the calendar in the world. Because Kelly won Spain, Roche won Italy and France. Roche won the world title. Kelly got bronze and the 2 bronze medals, I think it was, might be wrong, might have been a silver in there. And the classics as well. So it was just a great thing. And people in Ireland thought I'd created these two riders because the Irish think like that. And they made me a free man Shore, and because Kelly lived in Carrick-on-Shore, and it was for bringing the town into great repute around the world. And well, it was Kelly that did that, not me. And Roche got the same honours, became a free man of Dublin for being a champion. They were the most, it came with the birth of the Nissan Classic, which was the new Tour of Ireland for pros, and Kelly and Roche were there. Roche was the world champion, but Kelly made the breakaway on the first day, a group of 10 riders. The race was over for Roche, but Kelly was now the man to go on to win the Tour. The whole population of Ireland was on the race route. I remember we started the stage from Kilkenny Castle, and we couldn't see the castle, never mind the route, because of the people. And what happened was that my producer came up in the car and he asked the guards, which they call the police, the guards over in Ireland, he said, which way did the race go? Because you couldn't see which way it had left the castle grounds. And the police said, no, and he says, I think they must have gone right. So Michael O'Callaghan, the producer, said, well, I'm going left, because he was an ex-rally driver. And how we survived the rally down a road that wasn't closed and it was only 2 meters wide, I do not know. But we came out in front of the race and all was well. But then the eras came of, I never thought I was ever going to call a British winner of the Tour de France. Robert Miller had gone quite close to coming the first ever King of the Mountains, and he was Scottish, of course. But then along in 2012 came not one but two. Chris Froome, who the Africans claim is theirs, but we claim as ours because he races on a British licence, and Bradley Wiggins, of course, who was knighted after the upcoming Olympics after that too. And then, well, we began calling British winners like they were ten a penny. Geraint Thomas, Froome did it 4 times, etc. So I think there's not much else I can expect to achieve on the Tour de France, to be honest. I've been extremely lucky, seen all the eras and met some great people.
We've got some comments here from the bunch ride about
how are they all doing? Are they all got sweating out?
Well, no one's fallen off yet and going well. Diane Hannon seems to be having a conversation with her son yet.
Let me tell you, I punctured, by the way, on Zwift the last time I was riding in the front wheel and it wasn't moving. Don't ask me how. Carry on.
So John Pitchenden wants to know, tell us about Mario Cipollini and how does he compare with the modern day sprinters?
Well, Cipollini, I prefer, but Cipollini, Mario, he's a playboy, let's face it. He's got more than 1,000 pairs of best top-of-the-range leather shoes in his closet back home in Italy. He's retired now, but he's
much
still...
like John Pitchenden.
At the expense, he was a real showman. He actually, let me tell you a quick story about him, and I don't wish to offend all of our female riders, but this is a true thing that was said on full-on television, on Canal Plus, which is not known for the best straight, X-porn things, but even so, it was doing the Tour de France this year. And Cipollini had just won the stage with a sprint finish and pulled on the maillot jaune. And so this girl went up to him from Canal Plus and said, Mario, you'll see. She said, you are the leader of the Tour in yellow. Yes, he said. She said, what is better, an orgasm or wearing the maillot jaune of the Tour de France? And Cipollini just immediately, without hesitation, looked at her and said, well, it's the maillot jaune. This lasts forever. An orgasm is only 10 seconds. And that's absolutely true. And the whole press room collapsed with laughter. And now to come back to your point, Cipollini was in fact the man that sorted out the first time we saw real lead-out teams. That's where the riders came to the Tour to help Mario win. And on one occasion he won, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying, he won 5 stages straight, one after another, which was a record, of course, and I believe still stands. But Mario was a great guy, and he still is a big stud too. And he got stopped by the police for training on an autostrada, which is the equivalent of a freeway. Imagine doing this down in Melbourne. And he was riding behind a car at 60 kilometers an hour, training, and the police stopped him, looked at him, realized it was Mario Cipollini, and they said, "Oh, okay."
You're right.
And they let him go. Yeah.
So they started motor pacing for him with the sirens on, probably.
That's it. Yeah.
Because he's Mario. He's a legend.
Yeah,
Jonathan Regan and Brian Kelly want to confirm that they were at the Nissan Classic as kids cheering on Kelly. And Brian says, I remember it well. It was great times in Ireland. So resonating nicely, mate, with our audience.
I'll tell you what, Brian, if you were in Ireland at the time, there were magical times. I worked, because of the success of the Irish, for RTE, which is the Radio Telefiseren, which is Irish television. And I remember we were calling the World Championships. Already Roach had won the Giro d'Italia and the Tour de France, so he was now in Villach in Austria for the World Road Race Championship. And he went there specifically to get the victory for Sean Kelly. There was no question about it. The course suited Sean. But when the race unfolded, started in heavy rain, Sean missed the move, and Roach didn't, and he was in it. And he never worked. He was looking over his shoulder and thinking, where the heck is Kelly? He's supposed to win this race for Ireland and complete a fantastic year for the country. And then Sean realised that he wasn't going to get across. Roach realised he wasn't coming. And Roach suddenly, because Roach told me this later, that's how I know it word for word. Roach said then that I had to win this. I just had to win it because Kelly wasn't coming.
Showed up.
And he jumped early and he hung on and he won the world title. Only the other guy to ever win the top 3 races in any one year was Eddie Merckx in 1974. Nobody else has ever done it since that day. But the point I was making there, Brian, was that I was talking to the director who was in Dublin on the television, and he said, Jesus Christ, he says, they're actually stopping the cars at the traffic lights in Dublin, running out of the cars, leaving the doors open into the corner pub to ask how Kelly and Roach are doing. And of course, Roach won. So I can't imagine the traffic jams in Dublin that evening. It would have been fantastic.
It would have been fantastic. So we can, every single time you line up on the microphone, we can hear your passion for the cycle races, the organisers, the countryside, the castles, the abbeys, all that colourful stuff that you bring to it. You bring so much wonderful stuff to it. When things go poorly and when drugs show up, and this leads into your amazing relationship with Lance Armstrong during his years of winning. What does it do to you as a man when you call, you get excited, you look at it and you think, like the stories you're just telling about Sean and Stephen Roach, and they have a place in your heart, and statistically, because you're so gifted in that area, you can just spit it out and tell the context of the story and bring us all along that beautiful storytelling that you do. What does that do to you as a bloke when someone you truly believe in, like Lance, goes on Oprah and basically spews out everything that you defended him for 10 years? What does that do to you?
Well, I was very hurt, obviously. Contrary to popular belief, I was never a friend of Lance Armstrong because Lance doesn't have friends. He just has workmates and acquaintances. But I did work for him around the world, although he never paid me. I worked for the organisers who did pay me. And Lance, of course, as we know, raised a lot of money. And I brought him to the big functions, and I introduced people at those functions to Lance. Lance is a very awkward character. He would arrive always at the last minute, so he didn't have to spend time in the VIP room. I'd call him up on stage, and the last thing he wanted was to be kept on stage. He wanted out, back to his private jet, and back to Texas. That was always the routine, wherever he was, in Canada or America. And so I used to get, when I was at the receptions, these people were in stage 4 cancers, and they had no hair, and the girls were wearing bandanas on their head. They'd lost all their hair for treatment. And they said, oh, we can't wait to meet Lance Armstrong. We brought all this memorabilia, books. I thought, oh my goodness, this is never going to happen because I know Lance is not going to do it. But so I used to nail Lance. I used to say, okay, well, be ready to come up as soon as we get towards the end of the stage session. And then I used to go on with questions which have been submitted. We went through the questions. Lance usually comes on, gives a talk. Then we go through the Q&A. And then I can see Lance's eyes telling me, okay, let's get out of here. And I'm looking at him and said, now, Lance, just before we close, and I can see the hatred coming out of him, I've got some people you want to meet, and he can't move. He's locked in on the stage. These people who are, to be absolutely frank, and these people came up. Lance saw them. Lance's whole persona changes. This is what he's been. This is where he's been. This is what has happened to him. And he turns the microphone off, and he says, "This is not a private. This is a private conversation." And he brings them on stage, and he sits there and he talks to them. Now that's the other side of Lance Armstrong. Now I often walked away from some of these. The same organizer used to take me all over the world, a guy from Canada. And I used to say, Joe, I said, oh God, I just hope that Lance is not taking drugs. Because we did not know. We did not know. And I didn't really want to know, sure. because I'm also strapped to my commentary seat. I can't be an investigative journalist like David Walsh was, and he went for his throat, and finally he won. But Lance was a wanted man because all the agencies hated him because he took them all to court. They couldn't prove he took drugs, but they insinuated it, so he sued them and he won. So they all wanted to nail him. They leapfrogged over all his teammates, George Hincapie, Christian Van der Velde, you name them, and they got a rap over the knuckles for doing that exactly the same as Lance Armstrong did. Now, I'm not a supporter of drugs. On the contrary, I hate people who take drugs. However, he would have won some of those tours without drugs. He was very, very good. And he learned how to do it better than anybody else as well. So I've not spoken to Lance since. That was back in 2011. I spoke to him on television 2 years ago when I think he was looking for my job. But anyway, he's not on TV anymore now, as far as I know. But that's the way life goes. I'm very sorry. I was gutted because I asked him to his face in his room on one occasion, Lance, I just hope you don't take drugs. And he looked at me, he goes, nah. He said, I've been on my deathbed, I ain't going back. Those were his words. He lied as coolly as that to my face. And I've heard him say to people who have said to me, Lance Armstrong knows you know he takes drugs. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, he says you knew. I said, I had no clue. I had not a clue. We never had any conversation in that manner. I only saw Lance when I called him on stage. And before I got off stage, he was back in the limo and out to the airfield. I did fly in his private jet occasionally if we were going in the same direction. But then he sat up front on his internet and I sat down the back. Mind you, it was a big aeroplane and it was all his. Yeah. He used to joke about when the credit card went in to have it filled up with juice that he thought the credit card would burn up. But no, I really didn't know. And I wanted to, I hung on to the last hopes that somebody would prove he didn't. But of course he did. And the only reason he confessed is because they made his position untenable. His son was being beaten up at school because he was trying to defend his dad. Then they were all calling, your dad takes drugs. And his son said, no, he didn't, so they biffed him. Then there was his mum making $50,000 just for an evening dinner speech, saying how her son recovered from cancer to win 7 tours. That fell through the floor. And there was Livestrong, who'd taken $600 million, and now they were being told. So Lance visited those 3 people the night before he went and recorded the opera show. And he broke all 3. Livestrong finished, never to be heard of again. Lance's mum just broke down, and the kid was told by Lance, son, don't defend me anymore. I did take drugs. That's what Lance said to me. So that was it. And we never spoke again, just because we never met him, not because we had a falling out or anything. It was a sad time.
Well, I was one of Lance's diehard fans because we got
the
same last. Yeah,
but if I could just say, Duncan, if I could just say that when Lance was in his peak, the television viewers around the world, not just on American television, were through the roof. And when he went off in disgrace and gone, well, when he retired, he hadn't been discovered then when he retired. And the very next year, television figures on French television fell by 50%. And there's the French declining in every paper report, and yet the viewers liked him and watched him. And so,
he certainly was that ultimate winner. He was certainly an ultimate winner that viewership, really rides on him because he was so consistently a winner, and he had charisma and all that kind of thing. He had that brute strength and that bravados and all that kind of thing. And when you win races, people follow you. That's all there is to it.
He trained like 10 men.
Absolutely.
I used to speak a lot with his team manager, Brunio. Brunio said Lance is only allowed to train with his team twice a week because if he trains with them anymore, they won't be able to help him in the races. They'll be too tired. And Lance used to ride up to the top of Alpe d'Huez when they were wrecking the Tour, and the team at the top would go straight to the hotel. Lance would go back down and climb it again.
Yeah,
Johan would not let the team do that because they couldn't. Lance was very, very. He didn't take drugs when he was training.
Yeah,
at least to the best of my knowledge, anyway.
Nice.
Maybe I don't know.
Maybe you don't know. Enjoy that, Charlie. Hey, listen. Who's the best rider, Phil, that you've seen? You've seen all the riders. You've seen them all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
And
Eddie Merckx.
there's many categories of who's best. Like you tell that great Kippo story and stuff like that. But who gets your blood boiling? You know, when in all the years I used to watch it, you know, was it Eddie Merckx, the cannibal? Was it Le Mans because he was such a young, you know, brash American first timer? Is it the Brits that came along and finally they're going to do it for you and win a title like Sir what's his name Wigan did?
Yeah,
Bradley
Sir
Wigan.
Bradley.
So who was the rider that used to really get your juice boiling and stuff like that as the best that you've ever seen?
There's no question it's Eddie Merckx.
Okay.
And I didn't know him at the time. He was the reason I didn't turn pro, by the way. I had a pro contract and I couldn't beat him. He was racing
No one
his
could
last
beat him,
year.
brother. No one could beat
And
him.
he was formidable. He was a world champion at 18 and 19. And there was no way. So I took the contract to be a journalist instead of the contract to be a pro, which I think was the best decision I ever made, although I hated making it. Now with Eddie, not only was he the greatest rider, he rode 1,500 professional bike races in his career, and he won 525. Won one-third of the races he started in. I interviewed journalists in later years at the start of classic races, and I said to one top Dutch rider of the day, Gerard Kool, I said, Gerard, who's going to win today? And he looked at me, he said, Phil, if Eddie Merckx wants to win, then everybody here is racing for second. That's how good he was. But what the French hated him, of course, because he kept winning the Tour de France. However, when he, in his last tour, which he lost it because of an accident, and he refused to give up. So not only was he the greatest winner, he also became the greatest loser. And I think that was significant because Merckx crashed in a neutralized section of a stage that was going over the Alps, and he fell on his face, and there was a little kink in the bone there on his cheek, and the doctors put out an announcement saying that Merckx, they were not going to wipe their hands of him because he refuses to abandon the tour, and it's dangerous for him to proceed. So we want no more to do with Eddie. So Eddie rode the race. That day he got in the break. It was going to Morzine-Avoriaz, and he got up there. But in the next few days he lost the tour. He lost the lead to Bernard Thévenet. Thévenet smashed him out of sight. And Eddie was out of the yellow, and then he was... Every day the Belgian journalists were at my foot of my commentary position, which was an old wrought iron scaffold in those days. Eddie used to come up from the finish line, grab hold of the scaffold. The whole scaffold was vibrating because he was shaking visibly, and he was in terrible stress. And the journalist said, Eddie, when are you going to stop? And he said, I don't stop. And he didn't. And so when we got to Paris, it was 1975, it was the first year we finished on the Champs-Élysées. Even the French television commentators put a suit on. That's something they'd never done in their lives. And so Jean Lelio, his name was down on the live on the start and the finishing line on that occasion on the Champs-Élysées. And Thévenet was in the yellow jersey. He led by, I think it was just over nearly 2 minutes. And Merckx was alongside him in his world champions jersey because he was the reigning world champion. And then Lelio said to Eddie Merckx, he said, Eddie, you're coming to Paris for the first time in your career and you are going to lose the Tour de France. And Eddie looked at him and he says, what makes you say that? Well, he said, there's no hills on the Champs-Élysées and you're nearly 2 minutes behind Thévenet. Yes? He said, but I'm going to attack you immediately we start. And Thévenet, his face went red. He looked at Merckx. He thought, what? And as soon as the flag dropped, Merckx shot out the blocks like a greyhound. And Thévenet chased him, took him the whole length of the straight up to the Arc de Triomphe to catch Merckx. And then they went the whole lap, some 6 kilometers of the Champs-Élysées, back to the finish line. And Eddie could not, Thévenet could not get past Eddie. Eddie was going like a train. And the peloton were over a minute back. And then Eddie just sat up. He looked round at Thévenet, gestured him forward, and indicated, now you've won the Tour de France. It was a brilliant way. And from the next morning's newspapers, all of a sudden the French loved Eddie Merckx. He became the star. From being hated for winning 5 tours, he was now headline news for losing his first tour. Eddie is the most delightful man as age has matured him. I've been recently to his house in near Brussels. He's just a gentleman, just an absolute, utter gentleman. But on the bike, the Cannibal was a very good name for him.
Absolutely. Have another sip of wine.
Oh, thank you.
Because I want to switch to your love affair with Australia. You've got a love affair with a lot of places, and you know, Paul Sherwin, your long-term partner in crime in all things cycling, introduced you to the wonders of South Africa and the whole continent down there in terms of his nature reserves, and you're part of so many races down there too. But Australia has really adopted you in the most fascinating way. You know, like we love our sports commentators down here. When we think about Brucey with the Olympics and athletics and racing and AFL, we think Dennis Committee with AFL, we think Ray Warren with rugby league, Norman May with the Olympics, gold. We've done the same with you. You're the honorary Australian. And you keep on going over to the Australian Embassy in London, and every time you walk through the door, they seem to give you an honorary something. So you've got about 4 or 5 doctorates and honorary titles and patronins and all these sort of things in Australia, because we really have adopted you and Trish into our hearts in a very, very, very big way.
Well, it all started for me in 1988. When I was thrown off the aeroplane. In fact, I wasn't even on the aeroplane at Heathrow because I didn't know you needed a visa to fly to Australia. Okay. And I was very bitter about it. I said, what? I said, you're in the Commonwealth game. You're in the Commonwealth. What do you mean I need a visa? The guy said, I'm sorry, but you do need a visa for Australia. Look, we'll give you a seat on tomorrow night's plane if you get a visa tomorrow. And I got one the next day and then went back to the airport. That was my introduction to Australia. It was back in 1988. I'd just been to the Seoul Olympics. It was the bicentennial year in Australia. And the guy who brought me out was a guy called Phil Bates from Sydney, who organised the Commonwealth Bank Cycle Classic, which was, I organised the British Milk Race, which is a 12-day tour, 22 years, and Phil brought an Aussie team to ride it. And that's how I met Phil. He said, mate, you've got to come and see my milk race. And so I did. And for quite a few years, in fact, I did 18 Commonwealth Bank Classics before it finally went. And Trish worked on 10. She worked for the medical team, the Aussie medical team too, because Trish is a soigneur. And so, and by the way, her mother's a pioneer from Gawler in Adelaide too, great grandmother, whatever it was. So there was a connection there. But then it was a little bit longer before that bicentennial race started in Brisbane, by the way, and finished in the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne. And at the same time in came the Sun Tour, different race, professionals. Never the twain shall meet. My race was an amateur race. That was a pro race, etc. But I made great friends with icons of the sport in Australia. And there is no doubt Victoria is the hotbed for cycling. And they were on the verge of moving into summer road racing to match Europe. One thing tripped onto the next, Channel 9, Channel 7, ABC, SBS, which was called Prime originally, I think. All asked me would I work for them. I said yes. I never said no. And I just got more and more involved. All of a sudden, a guy called Alan Bateman flew to England. He said, we want to give you a package to do the Winter and Summer Olympics. I said, what? It's 2 years away. Yeah, he said, well, we don't want to waste time. And so for that reason, I've always, not since 1984, have I worked for anybody else except Australian networks. Currently it's 7, and it would have been in Tokyo this year, but now hopefully it'll be next year. 4/7, but and through there, the names you mentioned, people like Bruce McElvenney, they're the icons of the sport. And for some reason, it's not like the staid old Brits who are all uptight trying to score points. The Aussies get in together, and they really enjoy their job. They're not slow. It was the fact that it was an Australian who called me the voice of cycling, which is the name of the documentary that's coming out next week on me. And his name was Stephen Phillips. He came from, he lived in Albert Park in Melbourne. He worked for 9. Great humour. And he used to laugh. And we were working the Commonwealth Games in Auckland in 1990. And I was out at the velodrome. Stephen was in the studio. And he says, well, we're going out to Auckland to the velodrome now, he says, and we're going to join the voice of cycling, Phil Liggett. It went round the world. And from then on, everybody has called me the voice of cycling. Sadly, Steve passed away a couple of years ago, but his name and his legend is stand out. And of course, McElvenney, he's something else. That guy, I did a Winter Olympics with him. He had paper. I knocked on his room door in the hotel because I was doing the opening ceremonies with him. and I couldn't get in the room. There must have been 1,000 sheets of paper on the floor of every sport. I knew where everyone was. And of course, he was also getting the names of the flag bearers right, who was flying the aeroplane on the flight path. And so and he was on his hands and knees, all the furniture pushed back. McAvaney is a very special guy, and we go on very, very well.
Yeah, well, you're both statisticians, sickos, so I can see why you are up with Brucey. Hey, listen, I was standing with you in a foyer we were working for Channel 9 for the Commonwealth Games in 2006 in Melbourne. And I came downstairs because swimmers start a lot earlier than soft cyclists. So I came down early, but you had your kit on, standing there waiting for a mate of yours who made you a handmade bike and would have it ready for you whenever you arrived in Melbourne to go take you for a loop around the dodgy streets of Melbourne. And you were standing there and I looked at you and I thought, what a fascinating existence you have and the network of friends around the world that cycling has provided you. And we're all going to see that in Nick Bird's new film. And Nick Bird has been on Telstra Connected Cycling a few weeks ago talking about his Mammals film, and now the Voice of Cycling film, which is coming out next week. And we're really excited to watch it. Everyone's going to be seeing it. But I kind of looked at you and I thought, wow, you know. And for me, and like Kenrick Tucker from 1980 and 84 was from my hometown of Rockhampton. And so Kenrick Tucker visited my school when I was a teenager, and that lit my Olympic dream to go to the Olympic Games, and I was never going to be in cycling. But when it's those moments that you look, and I looked at you at that moment, I thought, wow, this is a man who has created so much of a global presence with his passion, drive, and love of cycling and cyclists. What's it like a day in the life of Phil Liggett? Because you're in such demand. You are the voice of cycling. Trish wouldn't feel like this, but what is it like being Phil Liggett every day?
Trish is laughing.
I can hear you laughing because you're saying, I can tell you.
Too many days in the life of Phil Liggett.
You're welcome.
The guy you mentioned, you were talking about, was a guy called Darren Bohm. He made the most magnificent bikes in it from his workshop in Geelong, and as far as I know, still does. They were brilliant bikes, absolutely brilliant bikes. He only loaned me them, and then he put them in the window and put the name on them, as if it was my bike. He never gave me one, but he was always there when I wanted it. But I think it's because I've never lost my identity with the people I admire most, which are the athletes and people trying to achieve. And so if the guys want to go for a ride, you get me a bike, I'll go. And that's what happened with the Tour Down Under. The very, very first year I went to South Australia for the race, which was only the second time I've ever been to South Australia, which was 1999. Before the tour started, I had a phone call in my room from a guy called Peter Larvin. He was a Welshman, but he's lived over forever in South Australia. And he said, Phil, do you ride a bike? I said, yeah. He said, great, will you come for a ride with us in the mornings before the race? I said, well, if the schedules are that, sure. Okay, he said, 5:15 at the Hilton. I said, no, I don't do 5:15. I said, make it 6:15, I'll be there. Okay, 6:15. And we went, about 30 guys turned up. We since have got the whole ride sponsored now by a local cafe. It's called the Squadra, and it's sponsored by Bocelli's. Great coffee, looks after us every day. I taught him how to make bacon sandwiches properly instead of the Italian way. So this is all now back in '99, and now those rides have had up to 200 or 300 starters outside the Hilton. We had to start lining at the time we started because the groups were getting too big. And our television crews followed me to do features on it. The lads were getting a bit heady. They were becoming too many film stars in that group. But we still do it. We still do it. And hopefully if I get back to the Tour Down Under next year, we'll be out again. But it's the bike shops who volunteer the bikes for me. And they always get the best bikes. I mean, this year, I think it was Scott, I think, sent me the brand new bike from the factory just to go out on a club run with the lads. I just find it fascinating that they... You know, I dread falling off on the darn things. I don't want to scratch them.
I've got my
the life of a superstar commentator. Pro life.
They lent one to Trish, who used to ride with us in the old days, and I had to buy it. She liked it too much. She wouldn't give it back. So I had to buy it and got it shipped to Britain.
It's on my trainer.
And she still got it now. She'll ride it.
I rode it this morning.
Rode it this morning on her trainer, yeah.
Is that the proximity of greatness, Trish, is it?
That's it.
I never give in. That's my
That's
motto.
right.
Never give in.
That's right. Well, being married to Phil, you know, there's this long, that's a good motto to have.
Well, yes.
Hey,
I mean, you can't afford to give in, but I don't give in anyway. So I think that's why we're still together.
Yeah. I had to write I got a bike from Trek once, which they did give me. They gave one to Greg Lamond, one to me, one to a few other guys. But we had to first of all say what we wanted to say on the top tube. We had to give them a phrase to put on the top tube. And I wrote quite a long phrase, obviously too long, so they shortened it to never been passed. And so it says on the top tube, Phil Liggett, never been passed.
Never been passed.
Well, I think always been passed was probably a better phrase. But anyway, that's what it said.
Hey, listen, we didn't get onto your bird watching. You're not a twitcher, and you make it very adamant that you're not a twitcher, but you do love your birds, and you do love your what's name. So in 2 minutes, can you tell us a little bit about why you and Trish are into bird watching, and do you know David Attenborough, which Timothy Waters wants to know?
No,
I almost do.
We've been very close to meet him, but we failed miserably so far. But there's still a chance. He's only 70. He's only 94. There's still a real chance because he doesn't live too far away from us, and he's getting very involved again in conservation. But the answer to the question is no. But as far as I said on television once during the Rio de Janeiro games, when I was interviewed there, I said, because I was asked the question, who did I admire most, and I said Sir David Attenborough, and the world should not allow him to die because he's just so necessary. For my own part of the birds, we just love birds. We love life, love animals. I mean, this goes back to when I was 10, 11 years old. I wanted to know the name of the bird in the garden. And you find it, even to this day, you ask anybody, be it your country, my country, what's the name of that bird? Oh, no idea, mate. It's a blackbird. Well, yeah, it is black. Yeah, it's a good clue. And I couldn't, that wouldn't satisfy me. So I needed to know. And ironically, it's paid off well with all the pictures of the vultures you now get in the Pyrenees and the Alps, which were never there 10 years ago. They were introduced back into the Alps. So the Egyptian vultures and the griffin vultures, you name them, they're all flying around the Alps now. Now the helicopter's learning to pick them out better so we can see them better. The black kite, saw the black kite long ago in the Alps too. Yeah.
Sounds fascinating, mate. We could talk all day about it, not. What about... Now, we are going to wrap this up. We could talk all day, you know that. But
is anybody still on there?
Yeah. We've got 150 people still pedaling along well after this.
Well done, guys. Keep it going. How are you managing to smile at the same time? Because I can see you, I don't know.
Irish eyes are smiling, Diane. So our voice from the bunch is Nick Hoare today. Nick has joined us a couple of times. And for those who don't know, Nick is a colleague of ours who has broken his neck during a mountain bike ride earlier this year. Now, Nick is now recovering at home in Melbourne after weeks isolated in a hospital due to the COVID conditions, which were very, very tough. Nick and his family and friends have started a campaign called Wake Up Legs because he's a Jens Voigt tragic. So Wake Up Legs is a direct reflection to Shut Up Legs from Jens. And we're hoping that the Wake Up Legs campaign will get him walking and riding again very, very soon. And so, Nick, take us away, mate. Please thank Phil for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Duncan. And look, Phil, as Duncan's just said, I think we could listen for hours and hours and hours. And actually, we all have listened to you for hours and hours and hours over the years, which has been fantastic. But to kind of hear the history of the tour through, from behind the scenes, through your eyes and experiences, and just getting these snippets of gold, through the ages, has been amazing. And also just to hear about the insights from your life journey and just the range of experiences that you've had, from the early days of crashing into elephants to picking out kites in the Alps has been fantastic. So really looking forward to hearing that and watching that the Voice of Cycling doco when that comes out. That sounds amazing. And it's just been a privilege from the team to have the honour to kind of say thank you to yourself and also to pass on to you on behalf of the team, life membership to the Telstra Cycling Connected group.
Yay!
Hey!
So congratulations on that. Thank you for a wonderful sort of hour approximately, and look forward to hearing your dulcet tones on many events to come. So thanks, Phil.
Very much, Nick, and to you, mate, the very best of luck, and fight like you will. I know you will.
Yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Phil.
Now, Nick did mention, but we've got a GoFundMe page rolling to help him and his family in his recovery. And you can see that on screen now if you want to join in the fun of being part of his recovery and wake up legs. He's going to get those shirts made up and sell them by the billion, without a doubt. So GoFundMe for Nico. Thanks, mate. I really, really appreciate it. Now,
Cheers, guys.
it's time to say goodbye. Please enjoy the rest of your shardy, Phil. And
Well, there's
please,
nothing much left now.
no, have
Oh,
another.
apparently we're going to have another
We'll
glass.
have one more glass.
That was
That's
the first glass of the night, and it's already
Yeah.
10 o'clock in England.
Yeah, well,
In the
listen,
evening.
you've done a really good job of listening to Trish over the years, and this instant should be in that line too. Listen to her. She wants to have another
Really?
glass of wine. Let's go. But please thank Trish for us as well. Thanks, Trish. Thanks for chiming in. Great to have you on board too. Thank you.
Get a waving arm just there. I'm
That's
on
it.
the side, so I've enjoyed listening to it. Thanks a lot.
No worries at all. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us again. We'll see you all again next Wednesday if the protein can stay on. But from all of us down here in Australia, Phil, we'll see you next time, mate.
All the best. Thanks a lot, Duncan.
Look at the film.
Thanks, Duncan. Thanks, Phil. Brilliant.
Phil, thank you, mate.